Welcome, my friends, to another episode of Shoot First, Ask Questions Later. Today, we are having our first returning guest to the podcast, Rabbi Elli Fischer, who is now, I like to say that I'm a fan of responsa literature. I consider Rabbi Fischer to be an expert in responsa literature. So it is befitting to have you here as our first returning guest to the podcast. God willing, we'll see a few more returning faces as well. And to kick things off, I know we're going to talk about a few hundred years ago. There's a little bit of a controversy about carrying and opening umbrellas on Shabbos. But what I think it's probably going to serve for us, I would imagine, is that it's going to be a little bit of a microcosm, an example of your broader approach to how you read responsa. So maybe before we jump into the Noda B'Yehuda, the Chasam Sofer that we'll be summarizing outside for our listeners, in the abstract, can you kind of just describe like what's your chiddush? Like what would you say is like your unique approach to responsa literature? And then we could proceed to talk about this case study and how it actually manifests itself.
It's hard to put it, summarize it in just like a sentence or two. But I think one of the things that I'm trying to do is that number one, that response in general, they're not designed to issue rulings. They're designed to persuade. Right? They're arguments. They're not laying down the law. They're not judicial verdicts. They're more a lawyer's closing statement, if
Interesting.
you're going to compare it to, right? And I think that in order to really, therefore, understand a tshuva, you have to understand what's being said, what's not being said, who are they responding to, what are they responding to, what's going on in the world around them that it will allow us to understand these responses, right? So a generation or two ago, the response, the you know the there was an entire school of Jewish history that the most famous practitioner is probably Professor Chaim Soloveitchik, and he has a book called Shelot Utshuvot Kamakor Historia, responsa as a source of Jewish history. Right. And the truth of the matter is there's a tremendous amount of history that's contained within responsa, right? This is where we get a ton of information on communities and individuals and communications between them. But what I'm suggesting is sort of the reverse of that, right? It's what I would call history as a source of responsa. You need
Interesting.
to understand the history in a deep way, understand what's going on in this posakes world in order to understand what they're trying to do with a particular responsa. Now, there are certain chuvos where you got me. I don't have anything to say about the history around it. And then there are other cases where it really leaps out, where you can see exactly what they're dealing with on either side of the issue.
Right. Sometimes it's I walked in late to shul. Should I daven the Shachar Samida with a minion or the Musaf Amida with a minion? You're probably not going to
Right.
get a huge historical chiddush from that.
Right. And even questions, like with I don't know, like questions that are serious communal repercussions, aguna questions, mikvaot questions, eruvin questions. Sometimes there's some kind of um, technological or scientific aspect there that hasn't been explored before. For example, there's a new technology of some sort that allows for identification or that allows us to test certain things. How does the halacha digest technology? And the umbrella that we're going to talk about, that's a form of technology that halacha has to digest.
Mhm.
It's a technology. We don't think of it as technology because for us it's almost 300 years old, this technology, but it's a technology.
Right.
And
Technology
how
doesn't
does the
have to mean
whole
electronics. It means some new invention that we now have to
That's
reckon
right. That's right. And sometimes it's discovery like, okay, there's this new product that just came into the market. It's called coffee. And
Mhm.
we need to know, what bracha do you make on it? And can you make it on Shabbos? And is it kitnios on Pesach? And all kinds of questions like that, that like, here's this new thing. What do we do with it? How does halacha process it? And this is Shelot Chuvot are pretty much the front lines of that.
Absolutely. So this is like a good, I like how you kind of framed everything for us in the abstract. So let's take a look. So maybe give us a little bit of an overview of the big umbrella controversy, and how those principles manifest themselves there.
Okay. So first of all, in terms of background, you want to let me share my screen because I have a couple
You,
of things here that I
you
can.
could certainly share, though most people will be listening on Spotify or Apple, so they won't be able to see it.
Okay, that's fine. So then maybe I'll send you like a PDF and you can
Absolutely. And to our listeners, if you ever want source material from any episode, just shoot me an email, mitchellmkurtz@gmail.com, and we will provide that to you.
yeah. So um, in the major cities of Europe in the mid 1700s, this new fashion item came on the market. Umbrellas, right? It goes by different names. Umbrella and parasol, and the French word is, I can't remember it offhand. It's
Les paracels.
para para paraplia, something like that.
Well,
Gotta ask.
I wouldn't be able to, you could tell me anything. I wouldn't know one way or the other.
I mention that because all three words show up in the chuvas.
Ah. So it's interesting.
Parapluie,
You mentioned it's a fashion
parapluie,
item, right?
parapluie. Yes, I
Parapluie.
mentioned that it's a fashion item.
Interesting. Right. I know you
If
see
you
those
look
that
at
artwork with like, the noble women who are like carrying these parasols with them. So it's a fashion item. It's an accessory
in
rather than a
addition,
functional.
well, it's both.
Uh-huh.
It is both, and we'll see that that actually plays out in the chuvas or
Hmm.
in the discussion. It's a functional item, right? Parasol is to protect from the sun, and umbrella is to protect from the rain, but they're essentially it's the same in the same way. It's a fashion item because like if you look around today and you see people carrying umbrellas, invariably people are carrying black umbrellas.
Yes.
If you look at pictures, paintings from the 18th century, you'll see that it's invariably women carrying parasols, and the parasol matches their outfit.
So it's like a pocketbook essentially.
Yes,
It
it's
has a
completely
function, but it's
has
also
a
an
function,
accessory.
but it is completely accessorized.
Right.
Okay.
It reminds me, I think my wife was watching, I mean, basically in our apartment layout, whatever she's watching, I'm automatically watching. So she was watching reruns of Friends. And I think there was like one episode where one of the guys comes in and
Not
he's like,
macabre. Not macabre.
not Macabal, I know. Hopefully,
If it was The Wire, I would be macabre, but
hopefully, Rabbi
not
Yitzi Blau's
friends.
not listening into this one. I think in his infamous, modern orthodoxy should be
Yeah.
anti-TV article, Friends was like, public enemy number one. But anyway,
Okay, but Friends, I agree, but like The Wire, Breaking Bad, totally
oh,
not. Like that's high culture. Anyhow, continue.
what do you think of The Apprentice? Oh no, okay, we're not going to go over there. And the reason I bring it up is there's an episode where one of the male characters comes in with a pocketbook and he's like, "This is a great idea. I could put like all my little knickknacks in here. I don't get it. Why don't men have pocketbooks also?" And so that was the premise of the episode, if I recall it correctly.
Okay.
But so you see, it has a function as well. But anyway, as
Of
you
course
are.
it has a function. Of course it has a function. But
Yes.
it's also high fashion. So the first chuvas that address this all come out in the second part of the 18th century, right? The late 1700s. So the most famous one is the Noda B'Yehuda,
Mhm.
right? So in terms of background, the Noda B'Yehuda, it's in Mahadura Tinyana of Noda B'Yehuda, which means that it wasn't written until after Mahadura Kama was published. Mahadura Kama was published. It's easy to remember the date. Mahadura Kama, the first volume of Noda B'Yehuda, was published in 1776.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
That's a good
easy,
date to
easy to,
know.
yeah, easy to remember, right? Anything else of significance happened that year?
Can't
I
think.
don't know.
I don't know. You're in Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah. Um, so that 1776, and he has a tshuva there, and it's in fact dated. He wrote from Prague, Yudchet Shvat Tafkuf Mem Gimel. Right, so that's either it's probably January or February of 1783.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and he writes the tshuva to London.
All right.
And in London, there was a whole debate going on. There was one of the Rabbanim there said it's okay. One of them said it's not okay. And the Noda B'Yehuda says, yeah, this has also come here to Prague, and I've already given drushos about this.
Well,
And
if I
I
could
say,
back up for a second. So what are the potential halachic issues? It sounds like there's a halachic debate, right? This is a
yes,
tshuva. So what are the
correct.
religious objections to an umbrella?
Okay. So the Noda B'Yehuda, right, and this is, it gets really into the weeds. One of the reasons that it's so in the weeds is because you're dealing with in the Gemara in Shabbat in the Kuf Lamids. There's page after page where the Gemara brings up a certain type of furniture and talks about whether or not you're allowed to assemble it on Shabbat, whether or not you're allowed to fix it in place on Shabbat. And you're dealing with, Babylonian furniture from late antiquity. And by the time you get to the Rishonim, there's a lot of discussion of they think they know what it is, they have an idea of what it is, but the mitzias, right, the reality of the exact kind of kalim, the exact kind of instruments that they're talking about is no longer accessible, right? We don't know exactly what this kind of chair is and what this kind of window is and what this kind of awning is, things like that, right? But the issue that all of these things are dealing with is bonet, right? You're not allowed to construct something on Shabbat. You're not allowed to build on Shabbat.
Mm-hmm. So how would an umbrella constitute building?
So the Noda B'Yehuda, and I think that this is now. I remember once hearing another podcast where somebody's talking about the Noda B'Yehuda in this context. He says that the Noda B'Yehuda was very machmir because it was a newfangled thing, chadash aser min Torah kind of thing. Now, if you know the Noda B'Yehuda, and this is also like these great poskim, they have personalities, right? The Noda B'Yehuda, if you know the Noda B'Yehuda, you know that chadash aser min Torah is not his mo. He doesn't do that.
Right. That's associated with the Chasam Sofer usually.
That's the Chasam Sofer, a generation and a half later. Noda B'Yehuda is very empirical when it comes to psak.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and he even talks about experiments that when he comes with his conclusion about enlarging shiurim, right, measurements. It's based on empirical studies that he did in his Beit Midrash. Okay.
Oh, really? Interesting. They brought them into the Beit Midrash and did an experiment. That's I wasn't familiar with that.
Yeah, when he was in the Brody Cloys, him and some of the chevra there, they're experimenting, pots and pans and whatever. Okay, so he's very empirical.
So the issue, if I'm understanding, is that the opening and closing of the umbrella could potentially constitute bona construction, and I guess soser would be deconstructing it when you close it.
Yes. So the word, I think this is the key word when it comes to understanding the Noda B'Yehuda, and he comes back to it dozens of times. It's in his tshuva. It's a long tshuva. Is variations on the word ohel. It says v'hu ma'ahil al rosho, shazeh ma'ahil alta al rosho, mechshav asiyat ohel. It's an ohel. It's an ohel. It's an ohel. Shmei ohel. Right? Because why? He's looking at this, right, and he's saying, what is the function of an umbrella? The function of an umbrella is to provide shelter. The basic function of anything that you build, of building a home, of building a roof, is to provide shelter. So how can this be okay on Shabbos?
I see.
Right? It's almost like it's this intuitive grasp of like it's something that provides shelter cannot cannot be permissible to open it up on Shabbat.
Forgive me
And
if
he
I'm
goes even
jumping
further.
the gun, but if I get a sense of where you might be going, is this sounds like the 20th century electricity debate about I have this feeling like there's something wrong with this. This can't be
No.
done on Shabbos.
So it's I don't think it's just a gut feeling. I think he anchors it in text and he comes out by saying that he thinks it might be usher de oraita according to the Rif. But
Mm.
but I do think that every posek in general has an intuition of yeah, and then they use the text in order to argue for this intuition. Chasam Sofer, certainly that's the case,
Right.
but other poskim also they intuitively grasp this should be mutter, this should be usher, and then the process of writing the tshuva. Sometimes they'll change their mind. Usually not. Usually their instinct is right, but it's a question of how do I anchor the argument in, how do I unpack my gut feeling?
Right. It reminds me of a letter that my Rebbe, Rabbi Dr. Jacob J. Schachter, once brought to our attention. I'm sure you're thinking of this as well as Soloveitchik, where he wrote the letter where basically encouraging smicha students to join the military as chaplains during one of the wars. I'm forgetting which if was it Vietnam or was
Korea or
Korea?
Vietnam?
It was one of those. Anyway, he says the quiet part out loud. He said, "I've already made up my mind, and now I'm going to provide you with the argumentation to back up my prior intuition." So he basically said the quiet part out loud.
Oh, you see that in tubas all the time, especially when there's internal pressure to come up with a
Oh,
pula.
for sure. I mean, I'm thinking
Aguna
about,
Shiloh
you know,
specifically.
yeah, like recently I was revisiting the artificial insemination debate in the 20th century. And
Mm.
I think the Chelkas Yaakov and Tzitz Eliezer essentially say this is, deplorable. You're not allowed to use that word these days. Whatever. Repugnant. They just had that intuition. Like, how is it possible to take the seed from this non-Jew and impregnate a Jewish woman with it? And then he's like, after going on a whole entire tire, he says, but now let me also demonstrate how it's halakhically problematic as well. So
Yeah,
yes, you do see that in the literature done. Sometimes
yeah,
more obvious than others.
yeah. So here, the Noda B'Yehuda, he doesn't come and say it's usher, and here's, like he doesn't talk about his instincts and his intuition. That's somewhat between the lines, but I think that his emphasis on the word ohel sort of gives away the game, right? He if you look at the function of these things, this is what it is, right? It provides shelter, and the entire the entire purpose of an ohel is to provide shelter.
Right, but also
How
at
can
the
it be
same time,
otherwise?
like that doesn't necessarily mean Noda B'Yehuda had some sort of prior intuition on this. I mean, it could just very well be saying, well, what is an ohel? An ohel is a tent. What is a tent?
Yeah.
It is a shelter that encloses you. So looking at an umbrella, does it fit those characteristics? Um,
Well, that's where the devil is in the detail. That's when he goes through all of these sugyas and say, like, maybe it's akin to this one, maybe it's akin to that one, because the Gemara does bring up cases of like awnings where if it's open a little bit, you're allowed to extend the awning, things like that.
Now, if I remember
Um,
correctly, this has implications not just in Hilchos Shabbos, but I believe he also brings in the laws of Tumah v'Tahara as well. Um,
well, I mean, the Ohalot, right? The Mishnah about making an Ohel is mainly about Tuma and Tara, right? About how um, how tuma is conducted, tumat mate. So
right.
these sorts of things are almost by nature going to slide into tuma v'tahara.
Right. And if I
Um,
remember correctly, there's a discussion about an Ohel Zaruk, about kind of a portable Ohel. This might be different than pitching a tent. This is a portable Ohel. And if I remember
right. So,
correctly, there's a debate about, or maybe you'll tell me if I'm jumping the gun on this one.
no, that's where the Chasam Sofer comes back and says differently. The Chasam Sofer comes back and this is part of his argument against the Noda B'Yehuda. The Noda B'Yehuda brings it up and says, and don't say this, that, and the other because, and he answers that the way he answers that. It's interesting. One thing that the Noda B'Yehuda says is that even if it's open before Shabbos, right,
Mm,
even if you open the umbrella before Shabbos, you're not allowed to use it. Why? Because when you lift it up over your head, that's what makes it into an ohel. When it's sitting on the floor, it's not an ohel. But when you pick it up and carry it over put it over your head, that's when it becomes an ohel. So even just picking it up off the floor and putting it, and putting it over your head on Shabbos is considered making an ohel.
Now that seems like quite a chiddush, if I might say, because
That is a huge chiddush.
I could see a timeline. I mean, like I always like thinking about alternative timelines in halacha. For instance, I could always imagine a timeline in which using opening a refrigerator on Shabbos would indeed be usher, and we wouldn't use all these spheres of Grumman electricity, and like we would just have to have an ice box on Shabbos, and that would just be normal as Jews. I could see a timeline where that happened. So I could also see a timeline in which the same way you have to cut up your toilet paper before Shabbos and set it up in the bathroom, you have to just remember to open up your umbrellas before Shabbos so you can use it to walk to shul. I could see a timeline like that existing. Yet that's not the timeline that we're living in.
So it's interestingly enough, there is one tshuva who says exactly that. Okay, it's from somebody who's not known for his tshuvas. It's from the Baal HaFla, right? Rav Pinchas Halevi Horowitz, who was a Rav in Frankfurt and one of the Rabbeim of the Chasam Sofer. He has a book of tshuvas called Givas Pinchas,
Huh.
and at the end of Siman Zion in Sefer Givas Pinchas, and it's this is not on Bar Ilan. This is not on. I'm going to schwitz a little bit here. I came across this just because, like, I like going through Sifrei Shelos Chuvos. I came across the Sefer. I was like flipping through it. I noticed this paragraph here, right? So it doesn't have a date, but it must be, it's written from Frankfurt and at some point in the late 1700s. And he says that the odos ha paraplui, right? The French word he uses.
Yeah.
He says, "L'da'ati nachon la'ashiro tamei erev Shabbat v'yismechu oto el hakotel." Right? You should open it up before Shabbos and lean it against the wall, and then on Shabbos you can pick it up. And even though when you pick it up on Shabbos, you're causing it, it's providing shade and shelter. He says, "Ein bozeh iser." That's not prohibited. Why? Nichnas b'bayit habanui the erev Shabbat.
Exactly.
Let's say you have an empty house, right? If I walk into an empty house on Shabbos, am I building an ohel? No. So this is the same thing. Just because it's not actually sheltering anybody right now doesn't mean that it's not a shelter. It's a shelter. It's built so I can pick it up and hold it over myself on Shabbos.
Exactly. It's pre-constructed already. The configuration of how I hold it shouldn't affect whether it's a structure or not. It's already a structure.
That's right. That's what the Givas Pinchas says, right? Now, here's the schwitz. I heard a number of years ago, probably 5-6 years ago, I heard Rav Asher Weiss give a shear on on umbrellas on Shabbos, and he goes through all of the tshuvas that you would expect. And he doesn't quote the Givas Pinchas. Now, I had come across this Givas Pinchas, and so I sent an email to Rav Asher and to his son-in-law, who works on his ksavim, and said, there's also the Baal HaFla, and I know that the Rav Asher Weiss is a big fan of the Baal HaFla, and I believe he's a descendant of the Baal HaFla. He says, there is the Baal HaFla does talk about this at the end of this tshuva, and I gave him the Maramakom. And then the next time he gave that shear, he quotes the Givas Pinchas, and he even gives this whole intro. Not many people know the Baal HaFla also has a Sefer Shelos Chuvos, and I'm like sitting in the back.
You say B'Shem Amro?
He did not say B'Shem Amro.
Well, at least on this podcast, we know it's B'Shem Amro.
Yeah.
Now we know who found it.
And his son-in-law wrote to me, even he said, you should know that this is going to be in this chapter. It came out in the newer reprint of Minchas Asher on the Parshios, and it includes the Givas Pinchas. And so you emailed me saying, Ashrecha Shazachisa, like, I got that into the Minchas Asher.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a real point of legacy right over there.
Yeah.
We're going to know it.
Yeah.
But now you're not the only guy who
That's a
knows it.
total brag. That was a total brag. Sorry.
But now
Right.
you're
The
not the only guy
third,
who knows it.
yeah.
But that's how Torah
The
works. We're
third,
supposed to share it.
yeah. No, I say it's fine. The third tshuva is from the Michtam LeDavid, Rav David Pardo, who was originally Venetian, I believe, but he was the Rav in what's today Split, Croatia, Spalatro.
Mhm.
Uh, he was the Rav. He was a major posek, roughly contemporary with the Noda B'Yehuda, and he starts talking about. He uses the Italian word umbrella.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, so he has a tshuva. It's Simon Aleph and Orachayim, and he says, I can't think of a heter. It's
I can't think of a heter. That's
He says there's no heter, right? Tamo. He says the ones who say that it's mutter. He says the ones that say that it's usser say that because the tefach, right? Even if it's got a tefach when it's closed, even if the top of it is a square tefach when it's closed, which would be the beginning of an ohel, which you're allowed to
mm,
extend,
right.
since nobody carries an umbrella when it's closed, it's not used as an ohel when it's closed. Meaning, if you saw somebody walking down the street in a rainstorm with a closed umbrella,
Uh-huh.
you would think that either they're a weirdo or like I don't know, like me, they're from Baltimore or something. Um, but nobody uses it like that. Normal people don't use it like that.
Yeah.
So opening it up on Shabbos, you're making an ohel arai lechatchila, and that's usher.
Interesting. Yeah, so this would not be analogous, let's say, to like strollers nowadays, where generally you open it up a little bit already, and that way you could extend it further when it's raining.
Right.
That's
So
one.
I don't know. I don't know about strollers because again, you don't use a stroller when it's closed. So, but what he does say in the end is that um, Amira Lagai is fine. You can have a non-Jew hold it over you
Huh.
because he says it's only derabanan and this is shvus b'shvus.
He's very impractical to walk like that.
Yeah, I agree.
And
I
not
agree.
everyone has just like a random non-Jewish friend to accompany them wherever they go. So it's very
Yeah, I
classist
live
when you think about it.
I live in Israel where like it's not a in the neighborhood on Shabbos there are not very many non-Jews, right? It's mainly caregivers from Southeast Asia like the Philippines.
Right, right.
Those are the only non-Jews who are here in the neighborhood.
But just to circle
Um,
back, I mean, it sounds like we have some really significant, heavyweights who endorse the idea of opening up the umbrella before Shabbos. And yet, unlike other areas of Shabbos where we could have debates, can I use sticky notes on Shabbos as bookmarks? Can I not? And there seems to be different opinions and do whatever you want. We all love you. Shalom Al Yisrael. For some reason, this has become like settled law. If you see someone walking around with an umbrella on Shabbos, you'll question their kashrus and everything else. So why did this become settled law? Any sense of why?
okay.
Yeah. Okay. You're
So
thinking about that.
now we're going to turn from function to fashion.
Ah.
Okay. Noda B'Yehuda and the others, the Michtam LeDavid. So we have three major poskim, the Balafla, the Noda B'Yehuda, the Michtam LeDavid. They all talk about it. They're all machmir on some level. Two out of the three are also makel on some level. You can have a non-Jew hold it over you, or you can, if you open it up before Shabbos, it's okay. Fine. Now we have a letter, and it's kind of unexpected. And again, let's think about the timeline. These are all three of those tshuvas are written in the last decades of the 1700s, right?
Mhm.
1780s, 1790s. Fine. We don't have very much that was written by Rav Mendel of Rimanov, an early Hasidic Rebbe, a Talmud of the Noam Elimelech.
Uh-huh.
But we do have one umbrella that he sent to Hungary
What?
in 1812. right? So we're jumping about 20 to 30 years now. In 1812, he sent a letter from Remenov to one of his students in Hungary named Rav Chaim Chartlis. Now, today we think of Hungarians as being Hasidim. Rav Chaim Chartlis might have been one of the first Hasidim in Hungary.
Hmm.
Okay,
Okay.
it was very early. Right? Soon after that, you'll have the Yismach Moshe was there, and fine. Now, Rav Mendel Rimanov, a little bit about him. Today it's you're a pulpit rabbi today. Um, you can't be a pulpit rabbi without having heard the term prosperity gospel.
Ah, sorry, I just
Okay.
had to cracks for a moment. Okay, go for
Yes. Yes. That's a good cracks. That's a good cracks.
it. Maybe tell our
Um,
listeners about it if they haven't been zeicha, or they have been zeicha
so
not to hear of it.
you're in the thick of it, so you can say a couple of words.
I mean, the prosperity. I mean, essentially, my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, this obviously, as the name implies, it originates more in a Christian context. But you have all these preachers basically saying like, faith and financial success are all tied up with each other. So
Yes. Yes.
call one eight
God
hundred
loves you.
whatever, sow your seed, and you'll become rich and wealthy with a mega church like me one day, and your own
Yeah.
private plane and whatever.
Right. God loves you. That's why you have an SUV. Yes. Um, so Rav Mendel of Rimanov, his gospel was an austerity gospel.
I
Okay.
like that. That might be the
He
title of the podcast, by the way, the austerity gospel.
No, 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 because there's only one small point here.
Okay.
Um, Rav Mendel of Rimanov, and if you think about where he lived and when he lived in Galicia. Galicia in the late 1700s was annexed by Austria, right? It was Poland. And when Russia, Prussia, and Austria divided up Poland, and this is a major event in Jewish history. I mean, it's something that we learned in modern European history class in high school, but the partitions of Poland had just it's almost impossible to overstate the importance of that event, of that series of events to Jewish history, because now you have the world's largest Jewish population at the time,
Huh.
Poland, right? And you're dividing it up into three different empires. The biggest part is going to Russia. The next biggest part is going to Austria, and then the third biggest part is going to is being annexed by Germany, by Prussia, right?
Mm.
And the way that these different communities evolve after the partition is that's part of the bread and butter of Jewish history.
Wow.
So now Galicia, all of a sudden, it was part of Poland. Now it's part of Austria. Right? And so the Jews of Galicia, who were poor, and it was crowded, they turn westward. And they're looking, okay, what can we do to get ahead? What can we do in order to Germanize, make more money, get out of Galicia, maybe move to a bigger city in Bohemia or a bigger city in Austria, even Hungary. Right? This is what's happening. Rav Mendel of Rimanov is witnessing this, and his response is profoundly countercultural. Okay, and if you think about Hungarian Hasidus in general as being deeply, deeply countercultural, that is part of the legacy of Rav Mendel Rimanov.
Huh.
Right? It was his students that formed like most of the Hungarian Hasidus. You can even say like Dinov and Munkac, Satmar,
All my favorites.
Dej, to a certain extent, also what's it called? Bells and Sans are to varying degrees his spiritual descendants.
Oh, so okay, that's really significant.
He's a really significant figure, and in fact, he is possibly it's either him or the Chasam Sofer,
Whoa.
right? Are the ones who really popularized this idea of Loshinu es Shemam Lashonamu Malbusha,
Mm. Just tell our listeners about that briefly.
right? That this idea, which doesn't actually exist in any medrash. And I
Right,
wrote a
right.
paper
It's a
on this.
compilation of midrashim.
Right.
Exactly.
It comes from several different midrashim. It actually originates in a typo from the 1500s. Um, but the idea that the Jews in Egypt, the Israelites in Egypt, didn't change their name, language, or dress, right? That they
Yes.
continued to speak their language, they continued to dress in their way, right, in their distinctive way,
Hmm.
and they didn't change their names. They still used Jewish names as Uncle Maishi tells us, right? When we were slaves in Egypt so many years ago,
Well, and well,
right?
well. Now, I can't resist, but I'm sure you're familiar. Just so our listeners are familiar, that Rav Moshe Feinstein's tshuva or tshuvos on the topic is very significant because he accepts the premise of this, compilation of midrashim and the principle, but he argues that that was pre-Matan Torah. Before
Correct.
Matan Torah, we needed some way to identify a Jewish person. Post Matan Torah, it's the 613 mitzvos that
Right.
identifies as Jews. So I even found in this new sefer that came out from Rabbi Chaim Mintz, the Keinecha Yomerlach, there was a fellow who wanted to get Ramosha's Haskama so that he could sell pins to schools so that kids could put their Jewish names on their shirts. And Ramosha said, I can't endorse that. There's no mitzvah to do so. So he even
Yeah.
like poskined that lamaisa. But anyway,
Yeah,
so
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 that
what was the
svara, by the way, it also appears in a tshuva from Rav David Sperber and the Avar Kasta Dahanya, and it's a good svara. Rav Moshe, if I recall correctly, he doesn't mention Shem Lashon Malbish. He just directly quotes the Mechilta, which talks about Shaloshinu es Shemamu Lashonam Lo Dibru Lashon Hara, and that they didn't speak Lashon. There were four things: they didn't speak Lashon Hara, they didn't change their name or their language, and that they didn't. And that they shelo
the
prutzim arayos.
right,
I
right.
think that's because the shem lashon malbush
You
is
don't have
something
one medrash that has all three of them in one shot, right?
right, and that medrash it became extremely popular
Yes. It still
specifically in
is. It still is
Hungary.
today. That's
It
that's
still is, and and think about it. It's an extremely countercultural uh, narrative.
right. It goes against the broader culture.
It goes against the broader culture. It goes against Jews who um, who are trying to participate in the broader culture,
Right. So just
right?
bringing things back together,
Okay,
how does this get us to
so
umbrellas?
okay, so in 1812, Rav Mendel of Rimanov writes a letter to this student of his, Rav Chaim Chartlis, in the Hungarian town of Mud,
Nice name.
and he talks about, right, he gives Musser, right, he talks about like the terrible things, like the difficult spiritual environment that's going on, that's there in Hungary, right, and that he specifically singles out that people are dressing in a way that's immodest, right, and it's almost impossible to tell the difference between Jewish and non-Jewish women. And he says, there are other new things, terrible things. Minag chadash shalakum, a new non-Jewish custom. What's that? Right? They changed the directions
Uh,
of the buttons, which is still a marker in Hasidus, right?
yes.
That we don't do left over right, chas v'shalom. We put right over left. Right? This
Yes.
is something that he singles out.
And it's Midas Arachim over Midas Adin.
Yeah, all of that. But he starts off by saying that it's a minag chadash shel akum,
Hmm.
right? It's a non-Jewish custom. And then he says, Gam kavod Shabbos nepach lekolon, right? There's no respect for Shabbos, Rahmana litzlan. Why? Shazela hemi tanuge Shabbos lelich l'tayel berchovos uveshvakim im haparasol.
Obligatory gasp.
Yeah. So here it is, right? Three things that he talks about that are
Uh,
symbols of Jewish assimilation, of Jews taking on the
wow.
trappings of non-Jewish culture. One, they're dressing immodestly. Two, they're buttoning the left over the right instead of writing the right over the left. And three, they're walking around on Shabbos with parasols.
And now just let me speak to our listeners for a moment. This is why we bring Rabbi Fischer on the podcast, because I've looked at that sugya many times and I've done cute little contemporary halacha series and I've taught this before, but I never thought of it as being a chukas hakam issue. I always just looked at Ol Zaruk and Shabbos and Tahara. I never thought of it as a chukas hakam issue until this conversation.
Right. But which is why those pictures that you see of these dainty women wearing pink dresses and carrying pink umbrellas, right, all of a sudden it becomes part of the halacha discourse.
Wow. And I
Right.
guess coming to my question of why this became settled law more so than other machlokus and Hilchos Shabbos, I guess it's because there was an ideological element to it.
I think so. I think so. I think that here specifically there was a
Wow.
cultural element. Okay.
Beautiful.
Now he goes on to say, he says, look, I want to give you advice on how to deal with this. I know that if you say something to the rabbis in your town, they're not going to do anything. But what you should do, right? And even if you say something in my name, they're not gonna listen because like I'm Hasidish and they don't know from Hasidus there. But what you should do is you should quote it in the name of the Polish rabbis because then they might listen to you. And you
Hmm.
should write to the rabbanim in the main cities in Hungary. And he singles out two cities. Says, Lahodia benidon tzaram lekal kadosh Pressburg, lekal kadosh Oven Yashan. Two cities, Pressburg and
Chasam
Oven
Sofer.
Yashan. Let's start with the second one. Oven Yashan. What's Oven Yashan?
Okay, yeah, so
Oven Yashan is Alt Ofen, or in Hungarian,
old
O
ofen.
Buda.
Okay. Because I hear
Okay.
old and I hear Yashan, so I hear
Yeah.
old, new.
Alt
Okay.
Ofen or Obuda. Okay. Obuda is the older part of the Buda side of Budapest, right? Budapest used to be two different cities, one called Buda, one called Pest.
That makes
Um,
sense. Now it's Budapest.
and right, and essentially there were actually three components. There was Buda and Obuda. There was the newer part of Buda and the older part of Buda, which is the oldest part of the city. And then there was Pest on the east side of the Danube, and then they were merged. But back then in 1812, Oven Yashan, the biggest Jewish communities in Hungary, were in those two places: Pressburg, which is where the Chasam Sofer was, and Oven Yashan, which is that part of the old part of Budapest.
Hmm.
Okay,
Okay.
this is again Yom Gimel Tetzaveh Tavkuf Ayin Beis. So it's in the winter, early spring of 1812. Now we come to the Chasam Sofer.
Okay.
Okay.
And hopefully we'll cover that because I still have two other questions that are not related to this topic. I'm hoping to squeeze in.
Okay. No, so the Chasam Sofer again, like the lumdus is important, and it's important to go through his argumentation. That gets really into the weeds, right? Eventually, like ultimately, he says that what he defaults to is when they built an ohel in the Mishkan, this isn't the kind of ohel that it was,
Okay.
right? So opening it and the fact that you can open and close it easily, and the fact that you can open and close it right away, and the fact that it's built initially even that you can, that it's portable, right? The lo matzinu ki yotzeh zeh b'mikdash haya ha'ohel over mimakom lemakom al yedei adam hanoso. But you
Right,
didn't have
because
the
for
ohel
for
there. A
a
person could
biblical
carry it
violation
around.
of Shabbos, it has to follow the paradigm of how it was done in the construction
Yeah,
of the Mishkan. So it
and
doesn't
we
fit that
also
paradigm.
right, and we also don't have right. We also don't have any example of something that's just a roof with no walls,
That's a good
right?
point.
Oel right is only, he says shamachitzot magiot la'aretz,
Right,
right?
we're
Walls
building our sukkahs right now.
all
We
the
want to make an
way
enclosed
right.
space. We need defanos. We need walls.
Yeah, yeah.
That makes sense. So
So,
so yeah.
but there's a couple of things that I want to point out. So,
Hmm.
how does he start off this tshuva, right? So, you always ask, like, okay, one of the first questions that I always ask when I encounter a tshuva is, who's he writing to? Who asked the question?
Right.
So, you open up this tshuva, it's Ayin Bet in Orachayim, Chasam Sofer. What does he write? Ya'an Ra'isi ben Noda B'Yehuda Ma'adura Basra,
Uh,
Siman Lamed. I
huh. So
saw it in Noda B'Yehuda, Volume 2, Siman Lamed.
he decides
It
to
goes
pen
to
his
Paris.
own response to the Noda B'Yehuda without anyone necessarily pushing him to do so.
That is correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And he doesn't publish it. It's not published in his lifetime, right?
Huh.
He wrote it in his ledger, but it wasn't published until after his death. But he knew that it would be published, and he felt it was important to record this for posterity. Now, an important question: when did Volume 2 of Noda B'Yehuda come out? First volume was 1776. When did the second volume come out? He
Not
died
sure.
in 1793.
Mm-hmm. All right. I don't know.
Okay, came out in 1811.
Posthumously.
Yeah, about almost 20 years posthumously, but as we'll see, not too long before the Chasam Sofer writes this tshuva.
Hmm.
Okay, so now here's where the story, here's where the narrative starts to come together.
Yeah.
Okay, I saw in Noda B'Yehuda Mahadura Basra. When did I see this? Very recently. It's a brand new sefer,
So he
right?
went to
It was
like the
just
farm store and he picked it off the shelf. He's like, "Ooh, that's interesting."
okay. Now he's in Central Europe. He's in the Austrian, the Habsburg Empire. The Noda B'Yehuda was the Gadol Hador of the previous generation,
Hmm.
the Gadol Hador of the previous generation, right? It's like you're in, you paskin something in Allentown, and then along comes there's a new sefer, and in that sefer it says that Rav Moshe Feinstein faced the same question and paskined exactly against what you just paskined.
Very, very likely that will occur many times over.
I'm saying like this is what's going on,
Right.
right?
So he needs to like defend himself over here.
He needs to defend himself, right? The Gadol Hador of the previous generation, a new sefer comes out in which he says opening an umbrella is a chashash iser deoraita, right?
Mm.
And here, okay, he even says in his tshuva, he says that there were people that did this, and I never objected to it. I
Mm.
didn't object to it. And he says, and I don't think I don't think you need to make a big deal out of it. It's probably not even an answer derabanan,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, at the very least, maybe you can have a non-Jew open it up, right?
Mm.
Which is more makil than we saw in the Mechtam LeDavid, right? Who said that a non-Jew has to hold it over you. And here he's saying, oh, Deos, at least, a non-Jew can open it up for you, but
Right.
it's probably not even usher to open it up yourself and carry it on Shabbos. Okay.
Mm.
So
Okay.
what's
So
the
now that
timeline
he
here?
issued that lenient psak and he's goes to this farm store and he's like, "Oh, wait a minute, the Gadol Hador proceeded me passing against this." All of a sudden, he has to by his own initiative, unlike most shuvos, where it's a shoel who asks you a question and then you write a response. Here, the shoel is essentially the Noda B'Yehuda, only he passed
Essentially,
something. He wasn't shol something.
yeah, that's right. Right? He's so the timeline is this: the Chasam Sofer, he was the Rav in a city called not Mattersdorf, now
Uh-huh.
Mattersburg, which is today in Austria. Then it was in Hungary. He was there for several years, I think maybe even 12 years. It was his, and then he gets the call from Pressburg in 1806.
Hmm.
Right, Pressburg is one of the two biggest communities in Hungary. 1806, he becomes the rabbi in Pressburg. Pressburg is a big city. It's one of the capitals of Hungary. It's high society. They had umbrellas there. They had parasols. And what does the Chasam Sofer do when he sees people walking around carrying these parasols on Shabbos? He does nothing. He says nothing. He thinks it's fine.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, he thinks there should be no, there's no reason to schmooze anybody out about it.
Right, right. This is not he's not going to pick a fight over something that's not even us or really
This is
his
this
opinion.
is not a battle to pick and choose. You got to pick and choose your battles. This is not a battle I'm choosing.
Right, and he certainly
Okay.
had other battles that he was able to
He had
pick.
many battles. This was not one of them. 5 years later, 1811, new Sefer comes out. Noda B'Yehuda Mahadura Tinyana. And in that, he says, this thing that I've been telling my community, either explicitly or implicitly, is okay on Shabbos. It turns out that Noda B'Yehuda thinks it's not okay. So I have to write something up about this.
Huh.
But then in 1812, we had this letter from Rav Chaim Chartlis. We had this letter from Rav Mendel of Rimanov to Chaim Chartlis, right? And in which the Rimanover says you got to go and talk to the Rav of Pressburg, meaning the Noda B'Yehuda. I'm sorry, meaning the Chasam Sofer. And does he do that? Well, I don't have a smoking gun, but there is one line in the Chasam Sofer's tshuva which I think indicates yes, that conversation took place.
Yeah.
He writes in his tshuva, Achara ion hate ketiv, after really close scrutiny, Omer Ani, I say, bivadai lisa parasol b'Shabbos, and certainly carrying a parasol on Shabbos, lav mishnas chasidim he. It's not, it's not the doctrine of the pious, right? It's not the teaching of the pious. B'shomer nafsho yerachik mimenu, and somebody who's concerned for his soul should keep far away from it. But it's not as bad as the Noda B'Yehuda says it is. Right. So where is he getting this from? Lav mishnas chasidim he shomer nafsho yerchak mimenu. I think that that's a nod to the Rimanover.
So Chasidim is Tarti Mashma.
Lav mishnas chasidim. He's like, I'm not gonna tell the Hasidim that they're doing the wrong thing. Hasidim want to say that, like, look, we're very frum. We don't carry these things on Shabbos. We don't do this on Shabbos. Fine, it's a good chumrah, right? Very nice, right? Carrying an umbrella on Shabbos, certainly not what a chassid should be doing.
Wow.
But it's not like the chassid. So I think that one line there is right. So you have the two sides. You have the function side and you have the fashion side. So again, Noda B'Yehuda comes out in 1811. This letter from Rav Mendel of Rimanov is dated to Parshas Tetzaveh of Tuf Kuf Ayin Beis, right? So that's 1812, fall, winter 18, winter, spring 1812. And then the Chasam Sofer signs his tshuva, Yom Beis, Tainus Esther, Tuf Kuf Ayin Gimel, 1813, Tainus Esther, Erev Purim, right? So it's really, the timeline is really wrapped up in a bow nicely.
It's a good muster also, what are you doing with your on Tainus Esther? I'm just like sitting on the couch watching movies. He was writing his tshuva, so it's a good muster. But anyway, so Rabbi Fischer, this so far is one of our longest running podcasts, and I'm enjoying every single minute of it. With that being said, well, we're gonna have to talk about feminism and other things next time, whatever that might be.
Wrap it up. All right.
But let me. So, what's the wrap up over here? What's the takeaway for our listeners?
I think that we have this tshuva. Like, you hear the question of umbrellas Shabbos, and you'll hear it's a machlokas between the Noda B'Yehuda and the Chasam Sofer. That's what.
Right. That was my understanding walking in.
Yeah, and it's true. That is the machlokas, but there's a whole story there of the Noda B'Yehuda and when did the Noda B'Yehuda paskin this and what's going on throughout the rest of Europe, and other rabbanim that are seeing this come into the market and they're responding as well. And then there's the question of, okay, the Chasam Sofer, he paskins one way, but then the Noda B'Yehuda comes out. So what is he going to do? And then you have this whole other element coming out of left field. Well, Galitzia anyway. This is a form of assimilation. This is chukas hagayim. How can you be doing this? And the Chasam Sofer, who apparently was not even aware of his Rebbe's tshuva on this, I don't think he knew of the Baal Flaw's tshuva on it.
Wow.
Is sort of like parrying both sides of this, the function side, the fashion side. And he doesn't come along and say it's mutter, carrying an umbrella on Shabbos, fine, no big deal. He's much more, he doesn't want to frontally, go against the Noda B'Yehuda. He doesn't want to frontally say this is okay. He's justifying why I didn't make a big stink out of it, why I didn't pick and choose this battle when I got to Pressburg. Right. So it's a much more, meaning there are personalities involved. It's not just
so much more.
This one says this and that one says that.
Absolutely. So I concur with that. This is why Rabbi Fischer, we brought you on the podcast, because I learned a lot myself. I walked in just saying, okay, there's a discussion of Ozark, and the halachas, as you mentioned, are really important. We encourage our listeners to actually learn the tshuvas inside if they can and see the halachic argumentation, which can't be ignored. But how much I would have been missing had I not looked, had you not brought to my attention about the different personalities, the dates of the chuvos, and the detective work you did to construct an entire narrative. I mean, this is remarkable, and this is why it's going to clock in as one of the longest podcasts
Yeah.
episodes
Don't
on.
worry,
But
between,
because every single moment was worthwhile, and I'm
yeah,
sure our listeners who are still listening at this point would concur as well. So, Rabbi
yeah.
Fisher, just continue on tzlacha, and I enjoy following your scholarship and your witty as a rabbi commentary on social media. So you should check him out on Twitter and other places as well. And just continue on tzlacha. Thanks so much for coming back on the podcast.
All right. Take care.
Take care.